Some votes are about conscience. Others are about survival. But this vote was about power. Raw, unfiltered, and unapologetic. December 2017. The world watched the United Nations gather for a simple vote. On the surface, it was about Jerusalem. But beneath that marble hall and the speeches dressed in diplomacy, something far darker was unfolding. And if you thought the UN was about unity, you haven't been paying attention. This is the story of how the most powerful country in the world turned a symbolic resolution into a global shakedown. To understand what happened in that room in December 2017, we need to rewind not just weeks or months, but decades. Jerusalem, one city, 3 religions, and generations of blood. It's sacred to Jews, sacred to Christians, sacred to Muslims. It's the epicenter of belief and the battleground of politics. And for as long as global diplomacy has existed, Jerusalem has remained a loaded word. The international community knew this. That's why for decades, the world danced around the issue, treating Jerusalem like radioactive material. No embassies there, no unilateral claims, just status quo. Until Donald Trump changed the rules. On December 6, 2017, Trump stepped up to a podium in Washington and shattered the precedent.
I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Boom. The political equivalent of lighting a match in a gas-soaked room. Within hours, protests exploded across the Middle East. In Gaza, in Turkey, in Egypt, European leaders issued cautious condemnations. The Pope issued a plea. And in the corridors of the UN, a countermove began. A resolution, one that would call the US decision null and void, non-binding, mostly symbolic, but loaded with political meaning. On the surface, it looked like just another UN vote. But the US didn't see it that way, and they were about to make sure the world knew it. Enter Nikki Haley, the US ambassador to the United Nations, sharp, confident, and unflinching. She walked into that chamber with a message, not just for the diplomats, but for the world. The United States will remember this day. We will be taking names. It wasn't diplomacy, it was a threat, and it worked like a cattle prod. Behind the scenes, the US State Department launched what some later described as a campaign of coercion. Phone calls, meetings, warnings, offers. Countries were told directly that voting for the resolution could cost them. Aid packages? Cut. Military assistance? Gone. Access to trade deals? Reconsidered. One diplomat from a small island nation would later describe it like this: "It felt like a hostage negotiation, but we were the hostages." And the US wasn't alone. Israel, whose claim to Jerusalem was at the heart of the vote, launched its own shadow campaign. Officials fanned out through diplomatic channels. They reminded allies of past favors, of military support, of development aid. They whispered promises. They hinted at consequences. This wasn't international relations. This was a global poker game. And the stakes? They weren't just symbolic. They were survival. December the 21st, 2017. The vote.
America will put our embassy in Jerusalem, and this vote will be remembered.
The hall was packed. Cameras clicked. Eyes shifted. 128 countries voted to condemn the US move. 9 voted against. 35 abstained. 21 didn't show up at all. On paper, a landslide. But to anyone watching closely, those abstentions and absences told a different story. These were countries that typically sided with Palestinian interests, but not today. Not after those calls. Not after those meetings. Not after those threats. The vote may have passed, but the pressure had worked. And the message was clear. Challenge the US, and you'll pay for it. The backlash came swiftly. But not against the US. Against the very institutions meant to hold diplomacy together. In the weeks that followed, the Trump administration slashed funding to the United Nations, peacekeeping, humanitarian aid, refugee programs, all cut. To many, it looked like retaliation, thinly veiled, brutally executed. It was a warning shot, said one European ambassador, and it hit. And then came the surreal moment. Nikki Haley hosted a reception, a thank you party for the countries that stood by the US or stayed silent. It was diplomacy by celebration or humiliation, depending on where you stood. But here's what made this moment historic. This kind of pressure, it wasn't hidden. It wasn't denied. It was celebrated in tweets, in press conferences, in headlines. We will take names. We will remember. And they did. Since that day, the playbook has been copied. China now uses infrastructure loans across Africa and Southeast Asia, often with hidden strings. Russia uses natural gas to force hands in Eastern Europe. And the US? It continues to weaponize aid, arms, and access. But here's the thing about UN votes. They're not legally binding. They don't change borders, or laws, or treaties. So why did this vote matter? Because it was a mirror. It showed us how global power really works. Not through handshakes, but through leverage, through memory, through that one call, that one check, that one photo op. This wasn't about Jerusalem. This was about control. And while the embassy still sits in Jerusalem, and the world still argues about borders and beliefs, the UN has never been the same. Not after this vote. Because what the world saw, what the small countries felt, was the brutal reality behind the curtain. That sometimes, when you go to vote, the choice has already been made for you. Some diplomats cried when they left that room, not because they lost the vote, but because they lost their voice. One Caribbean representative later told a reporter off the record, "We didn't vote with our values. We voted with our budget." What do you do when your principles are unaffordable? You compromise. You justify. You play the game. And it chips away at you. Those corridors of marble and glass aren't just political. they're psychological. And the scars don't show up on paper. They show up in how slowly a hand rises next time. They show up in how softly a nation speaks next time. That vote wasn't the end. It was the beginning of silence. 5 years later, the same tactics echo. Different issues, same methods. Development loans wrapped in red tape. Defense deals negotiated over humanitarian leverage. Food aid delayed by political friction. And still, resolutions come and go. Still, diplomats walk into that hall wearing tailored suits and guarded faces. Still, cameras flash, speeches flow. But the question hangs in the air. Who's really in charge? There are whispers of reform, new voices in the UN pushing for transparency, digital activists exposing backdoor diplomacy, young diplomats refusing to trade their ideals for incentives. But it's uphill, because old habits don't just die hard, they're protected. The 2017 vote wasn't an anomaly. It was a blueprint, a chilling example of what happens when politics stops pretending to be polite. And maybe that's where this story leaves us. Not with a clean conclusion, but with an open wound. The embassy's still in Jerusalem. The aid budgets are still political. The votes are still watched. But somewhere a new generation is watching too. And maybe, just maybe, they won't forget what happened when the vote was never free. This is Power Play, where the microphones are turned off and the real politics begin. If you've enjoyed this video, then you'll definitely enjoy the video showing on your screen. Click now, and we'll see you in the next one.